He hadn't heard his son's voice in 2 years. Not a word. Not even a sound. Then one afternoon, he came home early and found his little boy on the floor, smiling, holding a toy stethoscope, pressed to the chest of a woman he barely knew. And then the boy whispered something that broke him completely. "You're okay, Mummy." The woman was just the housekeeper. No training, no therapy, no reason this moment should have happened. But in that quiet living room, something sacred took place. And Anthony Scott, a man who built billion-dollar systems to solve the world's problems, stood frozen, watching his son speak for the first time to a stranger. He didn't hire her to heal anyone. He just needed the house cleaned. Someone to mop the floors, do the laundry, keep things quiet. After losing his wife, Anthony didn't care much who came through the door anymore. He was tired. Tired of interviews. Tired of hoping. Tired of watching his son slip further away. Adrian had been diagnosed with nonverbal autism right after the funeral. He stopped talking. He stopped looking people in the eyes. Stopped playing. Stopped everything. Touch scared him. Noise made him panic. Meals were a battle. Sleep never came easy. Anthony had tried it all. Therapists, specialists, custom programs. 7 housekeepers in 1 month gone. Nothing worked. And honestly, he didn't expect anything different from this one. Regina Wilson. She showed up quiet, kept her head down, and didn't ask many questions. He barely remembered the interview. He just told her where the cleaning supplies were and left. He didn't know her story. He didn't care. But God did. And what happened in that house, what he saw with his own eyes that day, wasn't an accident. It was grace, in the form of a woman no one saw coming. If you've ever asked God for a sign, and waited, and nothing happened, I want you to stay with this story, because sometimes the breakthrough doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like a quiet woman, folding laundry in the hallway, while a father stands in the doorway, weeping. If this story speaks to something inside you, subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from. Not just your city, but the place you're standing in right now, emotionally, spiritually, because this story isn't just about a boy who found his voice. It's about the God who never stopped listening. Anthony used to be the kind of man who had answers. People brought him problems, he solved them, quickly, efficiently, without emotion. But there's no manual for what to do when your child stops speaking. He remembered the last word his son ever said. It was, "Mama." Said it once, quiet, right after the ambulance drove away. After that, nothing. It had been 2 years. No words. No eye contact. No reaction when Anthony walked into the room. Adrian was 6 now, but in some ways, he still looked like that same little boy who stood frozen by the kitchen doorway the morning Julia died. Anthony still saw it sometimes, the way Adrian watched the floor, how his fingers curled tight when someone turned on the sink, how he covered his ears when the wind picked up outside. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. Anthony tried everything. Therapists flew in, specialists called in, teams assembled. Each one walked through the front door full of plans, left exhausted, defeated, and quiet. 7 maids had come and gone. Some left in tears. One quit after just 3 hours. None of them could handle it. Not the mess, not the child, not the grief that lived in the walls. Anthony stopped asking their names after a while. Stopped giving instructions. Just told the agency, "Send someone who can do the work. That's it." And then one morning, she showed up. Regina Wilson. She didn't knock like the others. Didn't have a clipboard or a nervous smile. The cook let her in through the side. She wore a plain shirt, pulled her hair back. Carried her own supplies. Didn't ask where the mop was. Didn't ask about the boy. She just got to work. Anthony noticed her once that first day, quietly wiping down the fridge, humming something he didn't recognize. Gospel, maybe. Soft, low, barely there. He didn't speak to her. Didn't need to. She wasn't here to talk. She didn't move fast, but she was steady. Every room she finished felt calmer somehow. Less sharp, less empty. Adrian didn't react to her, but he didn't run from her either, and that was something. The first time Anthony saw his son near her, it caught him off guard. He came down the stairs one morning and saw Adrian standing in the hallway, not hiding, not crying, just standing there, watching her dust a bookshelf. Regina didn't turn around. She didn't speak. She kept moving, slow and quiet, like she didn't even know he was there. Anthony stood still, afraid to breathe too loud. Adrian just watched. Then, after a minute, walked away. No screaming, no panic, just walked away. It was the smallest thing, but Anthony felt something shift in his chest. He didn't say anything to Regina about it. He wasn't ready to believe it meant something, but he noticed that afternoon. She left a small stuffed monkey near Adrian's corner by the window. Didn't ask, didn't explain, just placed it gently on the carpet. Anthony didn't touch it, but the next morning, when he passed by on the way to his office, it was gone, and Adrian was sitting by the window, holding it. The house didn't change overnight. Adrian didn't suddenly talk or laugh or jump into anyone's arms. But the rooms didn't feel as cold. The air didn't feel so stuck. And for the first time in a long time, Anthony didn't feel like he was the only one, trying. He never asked Regina about her past, didn't ask why she came, didn't even know where she lived. She came in the morning, she left in the evening. No questions, no drama, no sound. Just that same quiet presence, and the sound of a child slowly turning toward the world again. Anthony still couldn't name what was happening. Didn't know if it was real or if it would last. But deep down, something whispered to him. Don't move too fast, don't speak too soon, just watch. Because maybe, just maybe, something holy was beginning. No one told Adrian a new housekeeper was coming. Anthony didn't think it mattered. He barely spoke to her himself. The agency had sent her name and a start date. That was it. No long resume, no smiling profile photo. Just Regina Wilson, 28, quiet, reliable. That morning, she showed up 10 minutes early. The cook let her in. Anthony didn't go to the door. He stayed in his home office, drinking coffee that had gone cold. He wasn't expecting much. Every new staff member came in with the same pattern. Nervous the first day, hopeful the second, overwhelmed by the third, gone by the fifth. So when Regina walked in quietly, took off her jacket, and asked for a broom, he barely looked up. She didn't ask about Adrian, didn't ask for a tour, just asked where the mop was and what time dinner usually wrapped up. There was something still about her. Not stiff, not cold, just still. She moved like someone who had learned not to take up too much space. Not out of fear, but because it was safer that way. She didn't wear perfume. She didn't wear earbuds. And she didn't speak unless spoken to. The first day, she cleaned the kitchen with slow, quiet motions, like someone wiping down more than just surfaces. She hummed once, soft and low, while rinsing a pan. Anthony couldn't place the tune. It wasn't modern. It wasn't loud. It sounded like something from childhood, something handed down. Adrian didn't react to her that day, but she noticed him. She didn't stare. She didn't crouch down or call his name like the others did. She just let him be. He passed by once while she was wiping the baseboards. She kept working, didn't look up, didn't try to connect. But she noticed him watching her from behind the curtain. That night, after Regina left, Anthony found something unusual. A small stuffed monkey, old, worn and missing an ear, was sitting near the spot where Adrian always sat by the window. That toy had been boxed away months ago. No one had touched it since. He didn't ask the staff about it. He didn't say anything the next morning. But by the time Regina returned, the monkey was in Adrian's lap. She didn't say a word about it. She just smiled, very softly, and went back to folding laundry. Over the next few days, small things kept happening. Regina placed a fresh cup of milk in the corner of the hallway near Adrian's usual spot. Nobody told her he liked it warm. Nobody told her he never drank it. But the next morning, the cup was empty. She didn't ask about it. She didn't celebrate. She just left another one the next day. And the next. Anthony began noticing how quiet the house felt. Not empty, just less tense. Staff didn't walk on eggshells. There were fewer slamming doors, fewer whispered apologies. He didn't want to say it out loud, not even to himself, but it was easier to breathe when Regina was there. Not because she fixed anything, not because she made grand gestures, but because she didn't try to be anything but present. She didn't avoid Adrian. She didn't chase him either. She just noticed. Like the way his fingers twitched when certain fabrics brushed his skin, or how he only sat near windows in the afternoon, not the morning, or how he always avoided the red crayon. She never asked Anthony about him, but she watched, and she listened, and something about that felt like grace. One evening, Anthony passed by the living room. Regina was sitting on the floor, folding clean towels into neat stacks. Adrian was a few feet away, facing the wall, rocking gently, holding his stuffed monkey. Neither of them said a word, but they were in the same room, breathing the same air, not afraid of each other. And for some reason, that image stayed with Anthony the rest of the night. He still didn't know who Regina Wilson was, where she came from, what her past looked like, but there was something about her he couldn't explain. She wasn't a therapist. She wasn't trained. She wasn't trying to prove anything. But something about the way she noticed the world made it feel less broken. And somehow, without trying, she was beginning to reach the one soul Anthony had spent 2 years failing to reach. Adrian didn't start talking. He didn't run into anyone's arms or laugh out loud. But he began showing up. That was the first sign. He started appearing in doorways. Not close, just near. Watching Regina as she worked. She never called out to him. Never tried to bring him in. She just did her tasks like usual, folding, sweeping, wiping down the tables. But she saw him. Sometimes it was just his eyes behind a curtain. Sometimes his feet just visible around a corner. And she let him stay hidden. She never made it about him. But she always kept the room quiet. Always moved a little slower when he was near. Always hummed that same soft tune like a memory carried on the edge of her breath. One afternoon, she was wiping the kitchen counter when she noticed Adrian's cup of milk hadn't been touched. She didn't throw it out. She warmed it again, poured it into a clean cup, and set it by the wall where he usually sat with his monkey. She didn't look back. Didn't wait to see what happened. She just went back to wiping crumbs from the sink. A few minutes later, she walked past again. The cup was gone, and the monkey had been placed beside it. Like a thank you, without words. Anthony had started paying attention more, too. He never said anything, but he began lingering near the rooms where Regina worked. Not to monitor, not to intrude, just to see what she saw. One morning, he paused by the staircase and watched Adrian sitting on the floor just outside the laundry room. Regina was folding towels, quiet, focused. Adrian was near the doorway. Not inside the room, not watching her directly, but close. The boy wasn't rocking, wasn't covering his ears, wasn't crying, just sitting, still, present. Anthony hadn't seen that in months. Later that week, Regina was mopping the hallway. She paused at a spot where Adrian had been standing earlier. A red crayon was lying on the floor. She picked it up, looked at it, and placed it gently on the windowsill, away from the others. Anthony noticed. He remembered what the last therapist had said. That Adrian hated red. That it might be linked to the memory of Julia's dress that day. The color of the ambulance lights. Regina hadn't been told any of that. But she noticed. She knew. And that's when Anthony started wondering, who is this woman? One morning, Anthony came downstairs early. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy. He walked into the living room, half expecting to be alone. But there they were. Regina sat on the carpet, folding pillowcases. Adrian was sitting just a few feet away, closer than before. He wasn't looking at her, but he wasn't turning away either. His monkey sat in his lap, He gently patted its head, then looked up just for a second and glanced toward Regina. She didn't react. She didn't smile. Didn't reach out. She just hummed, soft and steady, like a prayer no one had taught her, but she'd always known. That evening, after the staff left, Anthony stood by the kitchen window and watched the sun go down. He couldn't explain what he was feeling. It wasn't hope. Not quite. Hope had been too quiet for too long. But it was something. Something like stillness. Something like not fighting anymore. He thought of all the people who had walked through that door before Regina. All the degrees, all the promises, all the plans. None of them stayed. But this woman, who said almost nothing, who came with no credentials, was slowly rebuilding a bridge no one else had been able to touch. And she was doing it, without touching anything at all. Anthony wasn't supposed to be home that early. Meetings had been cancelled. He didn't call ahead, didn't tell anyone he was coming back. He pulled into the driveway out of habit, not intention. The house looked the same as always, still, private, untouched. But something in him felt different, like something quiet had been waiting. He stepped inside and noticed it right away. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, warm, even. No crying, no echo. Just a hush that felt settled. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath. He set his keys down and walked toward the living room. That's when he saw it. Regina was lying on the floor. Not in distress, not asleep, just still. Her yellow gloves were still on. A red cleaning bucket sat a few feet away. A dish towel laid neatly across her lap. And next to her, Adrian, sitting cross-legged, his head slightly tilted, holding a plastic stethoscope in his small hands. He placed it gently against Regina's chest, watched it, then touched it again. He was calm. He was focused. Then, without looking up, Adrian whispered, "You're okay, Mommy." Anthony stopped breathing. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching something he couldn't explain. Something no therapist, no doctor, no program had ever been able to do. Adrian had spoken. After 2 years of silence, after thousands of dollars spent on treatments, after sleepless nights and unanswered prayers, his son had spoken. Not to him. Not during a session. Not in response to flashcards or routines. But here on the living room floor, to a woman he barely knew. Anthony felt everything at once. Relief. Grief. Shock. Jealousy. Yes, jealousy. Because that word, Mummy, was meant for someone else. It wasn't supposed to be hers. It wasn't supposed to come out like that, so natural, so soft, so real. It should have been said in a moment he could share. In a space he had created. Not like this. Not without him. He turned away before they could see him. His eyes burned, his chest ached. He walked back to his office like he was moving through water. And then, for the first time in over a year, Anthony Scott, a man known for never breaking, sat down behind his desk and wept. He didn't know how to feel. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't stop seeing the image. Adrian, pressing the toy stethoscope to Regina's chest, whispering the word that had been locked away since Julia's death. There was something holy about it, but also something that hurt more than anything he'd ever felt. That night, he stayed up, staring at the baby monitor screen. Adrian was asleep, curled up with the stuffed monkey. Breathing slow, peaceful. Anthony didn't sleep. His thoughts kept circling one question he couldn't shake. Why her? Why not the experts? Why not the programs, the schools, the cutting-edge therapies? Why this quiet woman who said almost nothing and never promised anything? Why did Adrian trust her? Why did he speak to her? Why, Mummy? The next morning, Regina arrived as usual. On time, calm, quiet. Anthony watched her move through the house. She didn't bring it up. She didn't act different. She just got to work. And Adrian? He followed her. Not close, not touching, but near. He carried his monkey and watched her as she folded towels. He didn't speak again. But the silence between them felt alive. Anthony wanted to ask her something. Anything. But every time he opened his mouth, the words didn't come. Because deep down, he knew. He wasn't ready to hear her answer. Not yet. It started as a simple question. Anthony was sitting at his desk. The house was quiet. Adrian was upstairs with Regina, sitting on the floor again, playing with crayons, though he still didn't touch the red one. Anthony opened his laptop and clicked through unread emails. Then he paused. He typed her name. Regina Wilson. Nothing. No job history. No photos. No records from the agency that made sense. He clicked again. Then again. Still nothing. For someone who worked this well with children, with his son, there should have been something. Credentials, references, but it was blank. That's when something old in him switched back on the man who built a billion-dollar company because he didn't believe in missing details. He buzzed his head of security. "Can you run a quiet background check? On the housekeeper?" There was a pause on the other end. "You think she's a problem, sir?" Anthony hesitated. "I don't know. Just look into it." That night, Adrian wouldn't eat unless Regina handed him the spoon. He let her sit beside him while he colored. When she stood, he followed. Anthony watched all of it from a distance. Every small moment between them felt like a conversation without words. The way Adrian would glance at her, then back at the page. The way she'd hum, and he'd lean just slightly in her direction. It wasn't just comfort. It was trust. And it hurt, somehow. Because that trust wasn't his. The next afternoon, the security file landed on his desk. Anthony stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. He read it once, then again, and his chest tightened. Her name wasn't always Regina Wilson. She had changed it a few years ago, after leaving a hospital job out of state. She wasn't a maid. Not originally. She'd once worked as a pediatric caregiver until the child she was watching had a seizure and nearly died. The boy survived, but there had been an investigation. She wasn't found guilty, but she was let go. No one wanted to hire her after that. Rumors spread. Licenses revoked. Her record flagged, unofficially. That's when she disappeared, changed her name, took quiet jobs, no questions, no noise. The final page showed a court ruling. She'd lost custody of her younger brother after the incident. She never fought it. Anthony sat back in his chair. Everything in him wanted to stay calm, logical. But something deeper stirred. Not anger, conflict. Because it didn't make sense. That file was supposed to disqualify her, prove she wasn't who she claimed to be. But instead, it explained her. The stillness, the quiet, the gentleness that didn't come from training, but from living with a scar she'd learned to carry without showing. He could have fired her that night. He had the reason, the paperwork. But something in him said wait. That evening, after Adrian fell asleep, Anthony stood in the kitchen as Regina wiped down the table. "I saw your file." She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just kept wiping. "The seizure, the hospital, the custody hearing." She paused, set the cloth down, then turned. No panic, no defense. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. Not yet. He wasn't sure what he wanted. "Why didn't you tell me?" Regina looked at him really, looked at him for the first time. "Because people don't ask to hear the whole story. They just read the worst part and walk away." Anthony didn't say anything. She waited. "I didn't harm that child," she said. "It wasn't my fault, but that didn't matter. When the boy got sick, I was the one standing there, and that was enough." Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't cold, either. It was the voice of someone who had already accepted what the world believed about her and chose to keep going anyway. "What about your brother?" Regina looked down. "He was 12, I was 19. I was all he had. But after the case, they split us. He was adopted by another family. I wasn't allowed to see him. He sent me a letter once, but I never wrote back. I didn't want him to grow up ashamed of me." Anthony stared at her. You think Adrian's going to be ashamed of you? Regina blinked. Then she said, almost in a whisper, No, I think he already sees me, for who I really am, and he stayed. She picked up the cloth again. But if you want me to go, I'll go. Anthony didn't answer, because he couldn't. Not yet. He just watched her finish wiping down the table, then quietly walk out of the room. And somewhere, in the stillness, he felt something begin to break open. But it wasn't her. It was him. It happened on a Thursday. Nothing about the day felt unusual until the doorbell rang. Most people didn't ring at this house. Staff came through the side. Deliveries were left at the gate. So when Anthony opened the front door and saw two people standing there, badges around their necks, folders in their hands, he already knew it wasn't good. We're with Child Protective Services, the woman said gently. We received a report. We need to speak with you. They sat at the dining table. Anthony tried to stay calm, tried not to show his confusion or his rising anger. The woman opened her folder. The report says a non-certified adult is acting in a caretaking capacity for your son. He didn't answer. It also mentions a prior record under another name, employment history, an unresolved case involving a child. Still, he said nothing. Is there a Regina Wilson currently living or working in this household? He nodded once. She's our housekeeper. Has she had unsupervised contact with your son? That question stuck in the air, like something too heavy to move. He looked out the window. He could see Adrian sitting in the yard, his stuffed monkey in his lap. Regina was across from him, slowly picking up leaves one by one and handing them to him without speaking. And Adrian, his son, who once screamed at wind, at color, at closeness, was reaching out, taking each one from her hand. No words, no instruction, just presence. Anthony turned back to the caseworker. She's the only one he lets near him. The woman looked down, took a few notes. I understand that, but due to the history on her record, we're going to have to open a formal inquiry. And until that's resolved, she'll need to be removed from the home, temporarily. He didn't speak. Couldn't. The man beside her closed the folder gently. We know this is hard, but this is protocol. Regina didn't cry when he told her. She didn't plead, didn't ask who called. But Anthony could see it right behind her eyes, the ache of being pulled out again, of being told her presence was too much, or not enough. She walked upstairs to gather her things. Anthony stood in the hallway, unsure of what to do with his hands. He felt helpless, small, like the floor had dropped out from under the fragile piece they'd just begun to build. Adrian was in his room when she went in to say goodbye. She didn't speak to him like a therapist. She didn't give a speech or explain what was happening. She just sat beside him on the floor, held out her palm. He placed the monkey in it, then looked at her, really looked, and the moment shattered. "Mummy," he whispered, not playfully, not pretending, but like someone naming something real. Anthony stood in the hallway, holding back tears. He heard the sound that came next, a low, heartbreaking wail from his son, the kind of cry that comes from somewhere deep, where language doesn't reach. Adrian was screaming, kicking, clawing at the walls, and Regina didn't move. She just whispered through the noise, "You're okay. I stayed. But the car was waiting outside. Regina came downstairs slowly, her bag over her shoulder. She didn't look at Anthony, not because she was angry, but because looking at him might break her. He stepped in front of the door. "I can stop this. I can fight it." Her voice was almost too soft to hear. "You can't fight what people don't want to understand. They won't see what's real. They'll only see my record." He looked at her, really looked. For the first time, not as a staff member, but as someone who had saved his son's heart. "You're not what they say you are." "Neither is he," she said, quietly. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the monkey, placed it in Anthony's hands. "Please don't let him forget I stayed." And then she left. No drama, no goodbye, just a door closing behind her. That night the house wasn't quiet. It was loud with pain. Adrian screamed for hours. Not words, not tantrums, Just raw, empty cries that had no shape, only hurt. Anthony tried to hold him, but he was pushed away. He tried to sing, to hum what she used to hum, but Adrian covered his ears, and Anthony sat there on the floor, holding a stuffed monkey, and realizing he hadn't just lost a housekeeper, he'd lost the only person his son had ever trusted. The house felt different now. Not empty, not loud, just wrong. There was food in the fridge, dishes put away, towels folded. Everything looked fine, but nothing was. Adrian stopped sleeping through the night. He wouldn't stay in his room, wouldn't let anyone dress him, wouldn't eat unless it was one brand of crackers, broken into 4 exact pieces. He cried more, but not like before. This was deeper. Not tantrums, not fear. It was loss. A kind of pain Anthony didn't know how to reach. Every time Adrian passed the corner where Regina used to leave his milk, he paused, looked, waited. And every time, there was nothing there. Anthony tried to fill the space. He cancelled work, stayed home, sat beside Adrian when he colored, tried to hum that soft tune she always used. But it wasn't the same. The boy didn't move toward him, didn't push him away, either. He just sat in silence. Somewhere far, somewhere Anthony couldn't go. Days passed like that. Anthony kept watching the door, like maybe she'd return. No one did. Not the agency, not the staff, not the people who said they'd help. They came for the report, the questions, the removal, but not for the child they claimed to protect. One night, Anthony stood in the kitchen long after Adrian had fallen asleep on the couch. The monkey was still in his arms. The house was still, the kind of still that hurts more than noise. And he asked the question out loud, quiet, but clear. God, what am I supposed to do now? No answer, no signs, just stillness. But something stirred in him. Not rage, not desperation, resolve. The next morning, he made 2 phone calls, one to his lawyer, one to the private investigator he used during corporate buyouts. I want everything, he said. I want to know what really happened to her. I want to know who lied and why. 2 days later, the first folder landed on his desk. It wasn't long, but it was heavy. Regina had been working at a children's clinic in North Carolina when the incident happened. The child had a rare seizure disorder, undiagnosed, unpredictable. Regina had followed protocol, called for help, stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. But the hospital didn't want press, didn't want questions, so they gave the family a quiet settlement and blamed the caregiver. She was let go the next day. No hearing, no defense, no second chance. Her license was quietly flagged. She was told not to speak to the media. One nurse had tried to stand up for her, wrote a letter. It was ignored. And then Anthony saw it. A voicemail, buried in a phone record the investigator had recovered. It was from the clinic's administrator. If she talks, we'll bury her again. She's lucky she's walking free. Anthony sat there, stunned. All that pain, all that shame, all that silence she had carried wasn't hers to carry. He could still see her eyes the night she left, still hear her voice. They won't see what's real. But he had. He saw his son speak. He saw his son laugh. He saw something break open that no doctor, no dollar, no program had ever touched. That evening, Adrian had a meltdown, the worst one since Regina left. He screamed until his voice cracked, threw his crayons, tore a photo off the wall. Anthony held him anyway, not to fix it, just to stay. Adrian clawed at his chest, frantic, breathless. "Bring her back," he sobbed. "Mommy, please bring her back." Anthony's body broke into 100 quiet pieces. He rocked him gently, arms tight, eyes full. "I will," he whispered. "I promise you, I will." And for the first time in his life, Anthony Scott didn't care what the world said was allowed. He had seen the truth. Now he was going to fight for it. He didn't tell anyone at first. No announcements. No press. Just one quiet decision made in a corner of his office with the monkey still sitting on the shelf behind him. Anthony read the file again. Not as a businessman, not as a father, but as a man who had once begged God for help and didn't recognize the answer when it came through the back door. Now he did. And he was ready. His lawyer said it wouldn't be easy. Reversing a formal CPS action required proof, documents, testimony, time. But Anthony didn't blink. Do it anyway. He handed them everything. The hospital report, the flagged voicemail, the list of therapists who had come and gone, and a video. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet clip from the baby monitor the day Anthony had come home early. Adrian, toy stethoscope. Regina, still and stiller. And that voice, "You're okay, Mummy." Word started to spread. Not on headlines, not in blogs, but between people. The nurse who had written the ignored letter years ago came forward. A former hospital volunteer. A mother from a support group. Each one had a story. Each one had seen how Regina showed up in silence and stayed when others walked away. And slowly, the picture began to change. The hearing was scheduled on a Tuesday morning. Regina showed up in a plain blue dress, hair tied back, no makeup. She sat quietly in the back until her name was called. Anthony sat beside her. Adrian stayed home with a trusted sitter, crayons, and a monkey in his lap. They asked Anthony to speak. He didn't use a script. Didn't quote statistics. Didn't try to sound impressive. He just told the truth. My son didn't speak for 2 years, not a word. We had the best doctors, the best programs, the best people money could buy. None of them reached him. But she did. She didn't use charts or techniques. She didn't promise results. She just showed up, every day, quiet, present. And one afternoon I came home early, and I saw something I'll never forget. My son spoke. He looked at her, put a toy on her chest and said, "You're okay, Mummy. I've built companies that have touched the world, but nothing has touched my son's heart until her. I don't care what a file says. I don't care who made a mistake years ago. I saw what was real. And what's real is that my son knows who saved him." When he sat down, the room was silent. Regina didn't cry. But something in her eyes softened like a weight she'd been carrying quietly had finally been named out loud. By the end of the week, the inquiry was closed. Her record was cleared. The case was dismissed. And one quiet morning, without announcement or warning, Regina returned to the house. Adrian was sitting near the living room window when the door opened. He didn't look up at first, but then he heard the sound. That same soft hum, low, gentle, familiar. He turned. His eyes widened. He stood. And then he ran. Straight into her arms. Monkey pressed between them. No words. Just a moment that no one dared to interrupt. Anthony stood back. He didn't move. Didn't try to own the moment. Just watched. And in that silence, something healed. Not everything. Not overnight. But something. Regina never asked what Anthony said at the hearing. She didn't need to. And Anthony never asked what she prayed in those years of being unseen. He already knew the answer. It was in the way she folded towels. The way she left warm milk without asking. The way she let silence become safety, not shame. Later that night, Regina sat on the rug. Adrian lay beside her, coloring. Anthony sat near the edge of the couch, close, but not too close. And for the first time, the house felt like more than walls and light switches. It felt like a home. The house didn't change overnight. There were still hard days. Mornings when Adrian wouldn't eat. Nights when thunder made him crawl under the table and cover his ears. But the difference was, they weren't alone anymore. Regina came back the same way she left, quietly. No announcement. No celebration. She unpacked her things in the small room near the laundry, hung her plain clothes in the closet, washed her hands, started a load of towels, and just like that, she was home. Adrian stayed near her almost every day now. He didn't talk much, but his eyes were alive. He followed her from room to room with a crayon in one hand and his monkey in the other. Sometimes he would press the toy stethoscope to her chest, just like before. He never said the word again. But he didn't need to. They both remembered. Anthony watched it all unfold from a different place inside himself. A quieter place. He'd stopped trying to control everything. Stopped needing to know the next 5 steps. He was learning how to just sit and stay. He and Regina didn't speak about the past often. There were no long conversations. No drawn-out apologies. But there were shared looks, quiet understandings, moments when their eyes met over Adrian's head and nothing needed to be said. One afternoon, Adrian did something small. He walked into Anthony's office. Didn't knock. Didn't run. Just walked in. Stood beside the chair. Climbed up onto his lap. And stayed. Anthony didn't speak. Didn't move. He just closed his laptop. Wrapped his arms gently around his boy. And in the stillness of that moment, he realized. The silence had never been a wall. It had been a waiting room. A few months later, Anthony made a quiet decision. He used his resources to start something called the Adrian Project, a non-profit offering in-home support for children with communication disorders. No big launch. No red carpet. Just real help, offered in quiet homes like his used to be. He asked Regina to be the first director. She said no at first. "I don't want to be the face of anything," she said. "I just want to keep showing up." But he insisted. "That's exactly why you're the right person." So she agreed. On one condition. "We don't fix kids," she said. "We meet them." The house felt different now. Not because of new paint or new staff, but because there was laughter. Not loud, not wild, but real. Adrian had started to read. One word at a time. He still hated loud noises, still didn't like crowds. But he laughed when the monkey fell off the table. He painted sunrises with soft colors. He whispered, "I love you," to Regina before bed. He called her Miss G. She never corrected him. Every Friday afternoon, Adrian brought the toy stethoscope into the living room. Regina would lie back on the rug, arms by her sides, and he'd press the little plastic piece to her chest. Every time he smiled. Every time it mattered. Anthony sometimes watched from the stairs. No phone in hand. No deadlines waiting. Just his son. Breathing. Laughing. Present. There were no big endings. No final breakthroughs. Just the quiet beauty of something broken, becoming whole in its own way. On a cool evening in early spring, Adrian crawled into Regina's lap during story time. The book slid from her hand. He looked up at her, toy monkey tucked under his arm. "You're okay," he whispered. She blinked, pressed a hand to his cheek. "So are you," she said. Anthony walked past the door just then. Paused. He didn't interrupt. Didn't speak. He just smiled. The kind of smile that holds gratitude too deep for words. Because he knew. This wasn't the house it used to be. It didn't echo with silence anymore. It didn't ache with unanswered prayers. Now, it breathed. Softly. Steadily. Together. Your mother believed you could do anything. Anthony stood at the dining table, looking at his 8-year-old twin sons. Their shoulders pressed together like they could split the weight of failing between them. Was she wrong? The boys didn't answer. They'd learned that silence hurt less than trying to explain what they couldn't understand themselves. Michael's tears fell quietly. Victor's hand found his brother's under the table. Their father grabbed his jacket and left the room. And in that moment, in that crushing, suffocating quiet, someone else was listening. Someone who knew exactly what it felt like to believe you were born broken. Catherine wasn't supposed to hear any of it. She'd been carrying a basket of folded towels past the dining room when Anthony's voice stopped her cold. She stood there just outside the doorway, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't the anger in his words that shook her. It was what came after. That silence, the kind that sounds like a child's soul collapsing in on itself. She knew that sound. She'd lived inside it for years back, when every teacher looked at her like she was wasting their time. When words on a page looked like they were drowning. When she sat alone in her car at 19, staring at a job application she couldn't fill out. wondering if maybe everyone had been right about her all along, wondering if God had made a mistake when he made her. But standing there now, listening to two little boys trying not to cry, something stirred deep inside her chest. Not pity, recognition. Through the open door, she could see them. Michael wiping his face with his sleeve, Victor squeezing his brother's hand, so tight his knuckles turned white. Two boys who looked identical in everything, especially their shame. And for the first time in a long time, Catherine felt it. That quiet whisper she'd almost forgotten how to hear. This is why you're here. Not to scrub counters or fold laundry, but to see what nobody else could. Because sometimes, when the world has written you off, and you've got nothing left but your own scars, God puts you exactly where you need to be. Right in front of someone who's breaking the exact same way you once did. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like you were too broken to be loved, stay with me. Because this story is about to show you that sometimes the people who save us are the ones nobody sees coming. Catherine knelt beside Michael's chair, the green overlay still resting on the open page. For a moment, neither of them moved, just sat there in the quiet of the library, dust floating through the afternoon, light coming in from the window. Michael stared at the words beneath the green sheet. His finger traced the first line. The cat sat. His voice was so soft she almost didn't hear it. On the mat. He looked up at her, eyes wide with something she hadn't seen in them before. Wonder. I read it. I actually read it. Catherine's throat tightened. She nodded, couldn't speak for a second. Victor stepped closer, his arms crossed tight over his chest like he was protecting himself from disappointment. Does it work for everyone? 5. 2. I don't know, Catherine said honestly. But we can find out. She pulled another overlay from her pocket, this one blue, handed it to Victor. He took it like it might break, placed it carefully over his own book, started reading. His voice shook at first, then steadied. By the third sentence, he wasn't stumbling anymore. Michael grabbed his brother's arm. You're doing it. Victor's eyes filled with tears. He didn't stop reading, just kept going, his voice getting stronger with every word, like he was proving something to himself. When he finished the paragraph, he looked at Catherine. Why didn't anyone show us this before? Catherine didn't have a good answer for that, so she just said, I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to figure it out now. Together, that became their rhythm. Every afternoon while Anthony was away, while the house was quiet and no one was watching, Catherine met the boys in the sunroom. Not the library. Too formal, too much like school. The sunroom felt different, warm, safe, light pouring through the windows, plants growing wild in the corners, the old couch where their mother used to read to them before she died. Catherine brought supplies from the kitchen, shaving cream, food coloring, baking sheets. The twins looked at her like she'd lost her mind. We're going to write with shaving cream? Michael asked. We're going to feel the words, Catherine said. Your hands need to learn them as much as your eyes do. She spread the cream across the tray, smooth and thick, showed them how to trace letters with their fingers. Say it, feel it, write it. Michael spelled cat in the cream, then dog, then mom. His face lit up. It's like drawing. Exactly, Catherine said. Your brain loves this. Victor preferred movement. He couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes, so Catherine let him walk, let him read while pacing circles around the coffee table. You think better when you move, she told him. So move. He did, and for the first time in his life, the words didn't swim away from him. By the third day, something shifted. Michael finished his homework in 20 minutes, work that usually took him 2 hours. Victor read 4 pages of a chapter book without stopping once. They started laughing again, real laughs, the kind that filled the room and made the house feel alive. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, noticed. She'd pass by the sunroom and pause, listening to their voices. Never said a word, just watched Catherine with an expression that was hard to read. The gardener, Mr. Alvarez, smiled when he saw them through the window one afternoon, gave Catherine a small nod, like he understood something the others didn't. But there were whispers too. In the kitchen, in the laundry room. She's overstepping. She's just the help. What happens when Mr. Smith finds out? Catherine heard them, felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders every time she walked through the house. But when she looked at Michael spelling words in shaving cream, his whole face glowing with pride. She couldn't stop. When she watched Victor read aloud while walking in circles, his voice steady and strong, she knew. This was bigger than her job, bigger than their opinions. This was what she was meant to do. Friday afternoon came too fast. Anthony would be home tomorrow. The conference in Singapore had ended early. Catherine wiped down the coffee table, packed away the colored overlays, the textured letters, the baking sheets still smelling like shaving cream. Michael grabbed her hand. "You're not going to stop, are you?" She looked down at him, at both of them standing there, fear creeping back into their eyes. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Your dad might not understand." "Then we'll make him understand," Victor said, his jaw set with determination that looked just like his father's. Catherine smiled, sad and hopeful at the same time. Maybe. That night, she couldn't sleep. Lay awake in her small room above the garage, staring at the ceiling, praying for the first time in years. "God, if this is real, if I'm supposed to be here, please let him see it. Please." She didn't know if he was listening, but she closed her eyes and hoped anyway. The next afternoon, everything changed. Anthony came home 3 days early. No warning, no phone call. Just walked through the front door at 2 o'clock, exhausted from the flight, wanting nothing more than silence and sleep. He heard laughter coming from the sunroom. His son's laughter. He hadn't heard that sound in over a year. He set down his briefcase, walked toward the noise, pushed open the French doors, and froze. Catherine sat between the twins at the coffee table. Michael had shaving cream spread across a baking tray in front of him, tracing the word "believe" with his finger. Victor was mid-stride, walking his usual circle around the couch, reading aloud from a book about dinosaurs. All three of them were smiling, and Anthony, standing in the doorway, travel bag still slung over his shoulder, couldn't move. The table was covered, colored plastic sheets, letter tiles with different textures, headphones connected to an audiobook, a mess of learning that looked nothing like the rigid tutoring sessions he'd paid thousands for. "What the hell is this?" The words came out sharper than he meant them to. Catherine's heart dropped into her stomach. She stood quickly, hands already reaching for a towel to wipe the cream away. "Mr. Smith, I can explain. You're the housekeeper." His voice was tight, confusion twisting into something harder. "I hired you to clean, not to—" "Dad, wait." Victor's voice cut through the air like a crack of lightning. He stepped forward, the book still clutched in his hand, his whole body trembling. "I read 12 pages today." Tears filled his eyes. 12, without stopping once. Anthony stared at his son, at the boy who hadn't finished a single chapter book in 2 years. "Please don't make her stop," Victor whispered. Michael scrambled to his feet, holding up the baking tray, shaving cream dripping onto the floor. "Look, Dad, I spelled dinosaur right. I never get it right." He grabbed his homework from the edge of the table, pages of math problems, handwriting practice, reading comprehension. Completed, nearly perfect. Handed it to his father with shaking hands. Anthony took it, stared down at his son's neat, careful work. His jaw worked. No words came. Catherine stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't ask permission, Mr. Smith." Her voice was quiet, steady, but I recognized something in them. Something I've lived with my whole life. Silence pressed down on the room like a weight. The twins stood side by side, hands clasped together, terrified. Anthony's eyes moved from the homework to their faces, his son's faces, glowing with something he hadn't seen since Rebecca died. Pride. When he finally spoke, his voice barely made it past his throat. "My office, now." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the wood floor. Catherine's stomach twisted into knots. The boys looked up at her, their faces crumpling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, kneeling down between them. "I'm so sorry." Michael threw his arms around her neck. Victor buried his face in her shoulder, and for a moment, Catherine just held them, feeling their small bodies shake, wishing she could protect them from what was coming. The walk to Anthony's office felt like walking to her own execution. Every step down that long stretch toward his door, Catherine's mind raced. She'd be fired. Of course she'd be fired. She'd overstepped, broken trust, done exactly what she'd been warned not to do her whole life, tried to be more than she was allowed to be. She knocked. "Come in." Anthony sat behind his desk, laptop open in front of him. His jacket was off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, but his face, she couldn't read it. "Sit." She sat, folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Long, suffocating silence. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me exactly what you did with my sons." Not angry, not accusing, just tired, and something else she couldn't name. Catherine took a breath, then another. "I saw dyslexia," she said quietly. "Classic signs, the way they reverse letters, how long it takes them to process words, the way Michael shuts down when he's overwhelmed, the way Victor can't sit still because his brain needs movement to focus." She paused. "I recognized it because I have it too." Anthony's eyes flickered. Surprise, maybe disbelief. She kept going. "I failed out of 3 schools before I turned 18. Teachers told me I'd never amount to anything, that I was slow, lazy, wasting everyone's time." Her voice steadied. "I didn't learn to read properly until I was 23. A woman at a community literacy program taught me using the same methods I used with your sons." She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "Mr. Smith, your boys aren't failing because they're not trying. They're failing because nobody's taught them in the language their brains actually speak. Every tutor you hired taught the same way, the way that works for most kids. But not for them. Not for brains like theirs." Anthony was quiet. His fingers drummed once against the desk, then stopped. He turned his laptop screen toward her. Security footage. The sunroom camera. His sons laughing. Engaged. Confident. Learning. "I haven't seen them smile like that since." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Since their mother died." Catherine's chest tightened. Anthony stood abruptly, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her, shoulders rigid. "I thought if I pushed harder," he said, voice low, "hired better tutors, spent more money, I thought I could fix them." He turned around, and for the first time, Catherine saw it. The grief, the guilt, the weight of a father who'd been drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. "But they were never broken, were they?" "No," Catherine whispered. "They never were." Anthony crossed his arms, looked at her really, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "I need you to teach me what you're doing." Catherine blinked. "Sir? Teach me." His voice was raw, desperate. "Teach me how to see my own sons." Anthony didn't sleep that night. Catherine left his office around 7, quietly, still unsure if she had a job in the morning. The boys had already eaten dinner with Mrs. Patterson mac and cheese, their favorite, and been sent upstairs to bed early. The house fell into its usual evening silence. But Anthony's office light stayed on. He sat at his desk, laptop glowing in the darkness, and started searching. Dyslexia symptoms in children. Dyslexia versus learning disability. How to recognize dyslexia in twins. Article after article. Research study after research study. Videos of children learning to read using colored overlays. Testimonials from parents who'd spent years thinking their kids were lazy, unmotivated, broken. The words on the screen blurred together. He clicked on a diagnostic checklist. "Does your child reverse letters like B and dood?" "Yes." Michael did that constantly. "Does your child avoid reading aloud?" "Yes." Both of them. "Does your child have difficulty with spelling, even simple words?" "Yes." "Does your child seem intelligent in conversation but struggle with written work?" Anthony's hand stopped moving on the mouse. "Yes." "God?" "Yes." They could talk about anything, space, dinosaurs, how engines worked. They asked questions that stunned him sometimes with their depth, but put a worksheet in front of them, and they shut down completely. He kept reading. One article mentioned that dyslexia often went undiagnosed in children from wealthy families because parents could afford tutors who just worked harder, pushed longer, drilled the same methods over and over without ever asking why the child wasn't learning. Anthony's stomach turned. He opened another tab, searched for the tutors he'd hired over the past 2 years. Not one of them specialized in learning disabilities. Not one. He'd spent $50,000 on people who were teaching his sons the wrong way, and he'd blamed Michael and Victor for not trying hard enough. His throat tightened. He pulled up the security footage again, watched his sons in the sunroom with Catherine. Really watched this time. The way Michael's whole face changed when he traced letters in the shaving cream, the joy in Victor's voice as he paced and read without stumbling, the way they looked at Catherine not like a housekeeper, not like a tutor, like someone who saw them. Anthony's hands started shaking. He pushed away from the desk, stood up, paced to the window, stared out at the dark yard, the pool lights reflecting off the water. Rebecca's face came to him, the way she used to watch the boys when they were younger, that crease between her eyebrows when she was worried about something. "Anthony, I think something's different about how they learn," she'd said once, maybe a year before the accident. "I don't think they're just being difficult." He'd brushed it off, told her they were fine, just needed more discipline, more structure. And then she died. And he never got to tell her she was right. His chest cracked open. He sank into the chair by the window, buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since the funeral, Anthony Smith let himself break. He cried for his sons, for the years he'd spent pushing them when he should have been listening, for Rebecca, who'd known something was wrong and never got the chance to fix it, for every time he'd made his boys feel like failures when they were just trying to survive. By dawn, Anthony's eyes were swollen and dry. He hadn't slept, hadn't moved from the chair except to pour himself coffee that had gone cold hours ago. But he'd made a decision. At 7:30, he called his assistant. "Cancel everything for the next 2 weeks. I don't care what it is. Cancel it." At 8, he found Catherine in the kitchen, washing breakfast dishes. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her face guarded. He must have looked like hell. He felt like it. "I stayed up all night," he said, his voice rough, "reading about dyslexia, about how kids like mine," he stopped, corrected himself, "about how my sons learn." Catherine set down the dish she was holding. "I need to get them tested," Anthony continued, "professionally, by someone who actually knows what they're looking at." "That's good," Catherine said softly. "That's really good. And I need you there." He looked at her directly. "When they do the testing, when we get the results, I need you to help me understand what it all means." Catherine hesitated. "Mr. Smith, I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a teacher. You're the only person who's seen them." His voice broke slightly. "Really seen them. And I need you to teach me how to do that." She studied his face for a long moment, saw the exhaustion, the regret, the desperate hope of a father who'd finally stopped running. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll help." Anthony nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "Catherine?" She looked up. "Thank you." His voice was barely a whisper. "For not giving up on them when I almost did." He walked out before she could respond. Catherine stood alone in the kitchen, her hands still wet from the dishes, tears sliding down her face. For the first time since she'd arrived at this house, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, God had put her exactly where she was supposed to be. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived on a Tuesday morning. Anthony had hired the best educational psychologist in the state, someone who specialized in learning disabilities, who'd worked with hundreds of children like his sons. Catherine watched from the kitchen window as the doctor pulled up in a silver sedan, carrying a leather bag and a calm expression that suggested she'd seen this 1,000 times before. The twins were already nervous. They'd barely touched their breakfast. "What if she says we're stupid?" Michael whispered to Catherine while she cleared their plates. Catherine knelt beside his chair, looked him straight in the eyes. "She won't, because you're not." "But what if the tests say, the tests are going to show what I already know?" Her voice was steady. "Sure, that your brains are brilliant. They just work differently." Victor stood by the window, arms crossed, watching his father talk to Dr. Chen on the front steps. "He looks scared," Victor said quietly. Catherine glanced out. Anthony's shoulders were tense, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, a posture she'd never seen on him before. "He is," she said, "but not of you. He's scared he missed this for too long." Victor turned to look at her. "You think he feels bad?" "I think he feels everything." The testing took 6 hours. Dr. Chen set up in the library, spreading assessment materials across the table, puzzles, reading passages, memory games, pattern recognition tasks. The boys went in separately, Michael first, then Victor. Anthony and Catherine waited in his office. Neither of them knew what to do with the silence. Catherine sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, trying not to watch the clock. Anthony stood by the window, pretending to read emails on his phone, but she could see he wasn't actually looking at the screen. An hour passed, then 2. "Do you think they're okay in there?" Anthony finally asked, his voice tight. "Dr. Chen knows what she's doing," Catherine said. "And the boys are stronger than you think." Anthony turned to look at her. "Really look at her. You care about them." It wasn't a question, just an observation. Catherine met his eyes. "Yes. Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Catherine thought about lying, about saying something polite and distant, but she was tired of pretending she didn't feel what she felt. "Because nobody cared about me," she said quietly. "When I was their age, when I was failing and teachers were giving up, and I thought I was the problem." Her voice caught. "Nobody fought for me. Nobody looked closer. And I spent 15 years believing I was broken." She looked down at her hands. "I don't want them to spend 15 years believing that." Anthony was quiet for a long time. Then he crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from her, not behind his desk, not standing above her, just there, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face. "I'm sorry," he said. Catherine looked up, confused. "For what?" "For whatever they did to you, whoever made you feel that way." His jaw tightened. "And for almost doing the same thing to my sons. You didn't know?" "I should have." His voice was raw, honest. "Rebecca tried to tell me, and I didn't listen. I was too busy, too distracted, too convinced that if I just pushed hard enough, everything would fall into place." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I've spent 3 years trying to be both parents, trying to fill the space she left, and I've failed at all of it." "You haven't failed," Catherine said softly. "You're here now. That's what matters." "Is it?" "Yes." They sat in the quiet after that, not uncomfortable, just present. Two people who'd both been broken in different ways, waiting to see if they could help two boys avoid the same fate. Around 4 o'clock, Dr. Chen knocked on the office door. Anthony stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "Come in." Dr. Chen stepped inside, her expression calm but serious. She carried a folder thick with papers. "Mr. Smith, Miss Walsh." She nodded to both of them. "The boys did beautifully. They're resting in the kitchen with some snacks." "And?" Anthony's voice was barely steady. Dr. Chen set the folder on the desk, opened it to the first page of results. "Both boys have superior IQ scores," she began. "Michael tested at 127, Victor at 129. Anthony's breath caught. "They also both have severe dyslexia and ADHD, Dr. Chen continued. "Classic presentation. The kind that's often missed because the child is intelligent enough to compensate for years before the system catches up." She turned another page, showing charts and graphs that meant nothing to Catherine but everything to Anthony. "They're currently reading at a second-grade level, despite being in third grade. Their processing speed for written language is significantly delayed. But," she looked up at both of them, "the coping strategies they're using are remarkable, graduate-level interventions." Dr. Chen's eyes settled on Catherine. "Who's been working with them?" Anthony gestured toward Catherine. "She has." Dr. Chen studied her with new interest. "Miss Walsh, have you worked with dyslexic children before?" Catherine shook her head. "Just one. Me." Dr. Chen's eyebrows lifted. She smiled, the kind of smile that held respect. "Then you have an intuitive understanding that most special education teachers spend years trying to develop." She closed the folder. "These boys are lucky to have you." Catherine's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Anthony's hand found the back of his chair, gripping it like he needed something to hold him upright. "So what do we do now?" he asked. Dr. Chen looked between them. "You keep doing exactly what you're doing, and you fight like hell to make sure their school does the same." The call came 3 days later. Anthony was in a meeting when his assistant knocked on his office door, her face apologetic. "Mr. Smith, Ashford Academy is on the line. The headmaster says it's urgent." Anthony excused himself, stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to his ear. "Mr. Smith, this is Headmaster Whitmore. We need to schedule a meeting regarding Michael and Victor. Tomorrow, if possible." Something in the man's tone made Anthony's spine stiffen. "What's this about?" "It's better discussed in person. Can you come in at 9? Anthony agreed. Hung up. Stood there in the empty hallway with dread settling like stone in his gut. That evening, he told Catherine. She was folding laundry in the utility room, the twins upstairs doing homework they were actually completing now, with colored overlays and extra time. "The school wants to meet," Anthony said from the doorway. Catherine looked up, her hands stilling on a towel. "Did they say why?" "No, but I can guess." Catherine set the towel down. "You want me to come?" Anthony hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I do." Ashford Academy sat on 15 acres of manicured grounds, all brick buildings and ivy-covered walls. The kind of school that prided itself on legacy, excellence, and test scores that kept it ranked in the top 5% nationally. Anthony had donated $2 million over the past 3 years. His name was on a library wing. None of that mattered when he and Catherine walked into Headmaster Whitmore's office the next morning. Whitmore was a tall man in his 60s, silver-haired and polished, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He stood when they entered, gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Mr. Smith, thank you for coming." Anthony didn't sit. "What's this about?" Whitmore's smile thinned. "Please, sit. This won't take long." Anthony sat. Catherine stayed standing by the door until Anthony looked back at her, nodded toward the empty chair beside him. She sat. Whitmore folded his hands on his desk. "Mr. Smith, we've been reviewing Michael and Victor's academic progress, or lack thereof, and the board has made a recommendation, which is, we believe it would be in the boys' best interest to repeat 3rd grade, or alternatively, transfer to an institution better equipped to handle their special needs." The words landed like a slap. Anthony's jaw tightened. "Special needs? They've failed multiple assessments, Mr. Smith. Their reading and writing scores are significantly below grade level. Ashford Academy maintains a standard of excellence, and my sons have dyslexia." Anthony pulled Dr. Chen's report from his bag, dropped it on the desk, "and ADHD, both diagnosed by one of the top educational psychologists in the state." Whitmore glanced at the report, but didn't pick it up. "Yes, well, that's precisely why we're recommending a transfer. We're not a special education facility." "They don't need a special education facility." Anthony's voice was rising now. "They need teachers who understand how they learn. Mr. Smith, with all due respect, Ashford has a reputation to maintain. Our test scores—" "Your test scores?" Anthony leaned forward. "You're talking about kicking out my sons because of your test scores?" Whitmore's expression hardened. "We have standards. Your son's performance affects our rankings, our college placement statistics. They're 8 years old." "Yes, and already 2 years behind." Catherine's hands gripped the arms of her chair. She wanted to speak but didn't know if she had the right. Anthony saw her hesitation. Looked at Whitmore. "Miss Walsh has been working with my sons. In 2 weeks, they've made more progress than they did in 2 years of your teaching." Whitmore's eyes flicked to Catherine, dismissive. "Miss Walsh is your housekeeper, correct?" Catherine felt the words like a blade. "Yes," she said quietly. "Then I'm sure she means well. But," Whitmore smiled condescendingly, "she's not a certified educator. Her methods, while perhaps well-intentioned, aren't relevant to this proceeding." Something in Anthony's expression went cold. He stood slowly. "Then, let me be clear, Headmaster. I'm withdrawing both my sons from Ashford Academy, effective immediately." Whitmore blinked. "Mr. Smith, I don't think you understand. And I'm withdrawing my $2 million annual donor pledge." The room went silent. Whitmore's face paled. "Now, let's not be hasty. I'm also telling every parent I know exactly why." Anthony's voice was steady now. "Certain that this school would rather protect its rankings than teach children how to learn." He turned to Catherine. "Let's go." Catherine stood, her legs shaking. Anthony walked to the door, then stopped, looked back at Whitmore. "My sons don't need a different school. They need people who actually see them, and if you can't do that, then you don't deserve to teach anyone's children." He walked out. Catherine followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They didn't speak until they reached the parking lot. Anthony stood by his car, hands braced on the hood, breathing hard. Catherine waited, didn't know what to say. Finally, Anthony looked up at her. "Did I just ruin my son's education?" "No," Catherine said softly. "You just saved it." His eyes filled. He turned away, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. "I should have done that 2 years ago. You did it now. That's what matters." They stood there in the morning sun, two people who'd just burned a bridge and had no idea where the road led next. But for the first time in years, Anthony felt something he hadn't felt since Rebecca died. Hope. Anthony couldn't find the twins' baby books. He'd been searching the house for 2 days, wanting to show Dr. Chen their early development records. Catherine had offered to help, moving through storage closets and spare rooms with quiet efficiency. They ended up in the attic. Dust floated through beams of afternoon light. Boxes stacked on boxes, years of life packed away and forgotten. Catherine pulled open a container labeled Rebecca, personal, inside, journals, dozens of them. Anthony froze when he saw them. "I didn't know she kept these," he whispered. Catherine started to close the box, sensing she'd stepped into something sacred. But Anthony reached past her, lifted one out. The leather was worn, the pages dog-eared. He opened it to a random entry. His hands started shaking. "What is it?" Catherine asked softly. He didn't answer, just kept reading, his face going pale. Then he sank onto an old trunk, the journal open in his lap. Catherine waited, didn't move, barely breathed. "She knew," Anthony finally said, his voice breaking. Rebecca knew something was wrong. He turned the journal toward Catherine. "Let her read. March 15th. Michael reversed his B's and D's again today. The teacher says he's not paying attention. But I watched him. Anthony. He was paying attention. He just can't see them the right way. I need to get them tested. I need to understand what's happening before they start believing they're failing." Catherine's throat closed. Anthony flipped forward. Another entry. June 3rd. "Victor can't sit still during reading time. His teacher called it behavioral issues. But when I let him walk around while I read to him, he remembered every word, every single word. There's something here, something everyone's missing." Another page. September 12th. "I've been researching dyslexia. Everything I'm reading sounds like my boys. I'm calling that specialist next week. Anthony thinks I'm worrying too much. But I know my sons. I know something's different." The date on that entry was 2 weeks before she died. Anthony's shoulders started shaking. Catherine knelt beside him, her hand hovering near his arm, unsure if she should touch him. "She tried to tell me," he whispered. "I remember that conversation. I told her they were fine, that she was overthinking it." His voice cracked completely. "And then she was gone, and I spent 3 years pushing them the same way everyone else did." Tears streamed down his face. "I failed her. I failed them." "No." Catherine's voice was firm. She grabbed his hand without thinking. "You didn't know. You were grieving. You were trying to survive. I should have listened. She would forgive you." Catherine squeezed his hand. "And your sons already have." Anthony looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes red and raw. "How do you know?" "Because I see the way they look at you now." Her voice softened. "They don't see a man who failed them. They see their father trying. And that's everything." They sat there in the dusty attic light, his hand still in hers, surrounded by boxes of a life that was gone but not forgotten. After a long moment, Anthony pulled another journal from the box, opened it near the end, found an entry dated a month before Rebecca's death. His breath caught. "Listen to this," he said, his voice barely steady. Catherine leaned closer. "October 8th. I had the most beautiful dream last night. Anthony and I opened a learning center for children like ours, a place where kids who learn differently aren't made to feel broken, where teachers actually see them. We called it Hope House. I know it sounds impossible, but maybe one day, when the boys are older, when we understand their needs better, maybe we could do something. Maybe we could help other families who feel as lost as we do right now." Anthony closed the journal carefully, set it on top of the box, covered his face with both hands, and broke. Not the quiet tears from before. This was deeper, years of grief and guilt and regret pouring out of him in waves. Catherine didn't say anything, just stayed beside him, let him shatter, let him feel it all. When he finally looked up, his voice was raw but certain. "We're going to build it." Catherine blinked. "What?" "Her dream. The learning center." He looked at her with eyes that were still wet but suddenly clear. "We're going to build it for her, for our sons, for every child who needs someone to see them." Anthony. She'd never used his first name before. It slipped out without thinking. That's a huge thing." "I know." He stood, still holding Rebecca's journal. "But you're going to help me. You're going to run it." "I can't. I'm not." "You're exactly who should." He turned to face her fully. "You understand these kids because you were one of them. That's worth more than any degree. But I don't have credentials. I don't have." "Then we'll get you credentials." His voice was steady now, determined. "I'll pay for your education, whatever it takes. You'll go to school, get your degree, your teaching certification, and when you're ready, we'll open the center together." Catherine stared at him, her mind reeling. "Why would you do that for me?" Anthony's expression softened. Because you did something for my sons that no one else could. You saw them. And maybe, his voice caught, maybe that's what Rebecca's been trying to tell me all along, that the people who save us aren't always the ones with the biggest credentials. Sometimes they're just the ones who know what it's like to be broken. Catherine's eyes filled. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her more than she'd ever dared to dream, and she was terrified. But she whispered anyway, "Okay." Catherine sat alone in her room that night, staring at the laptop Anthony had given her. A new laptop, still in the box, for school applications. She'd opened it an hour ago, created an account, pulled up the website for the local community college, but her hands wouldn't move. The cursor blinked in the empty text box. "Tell us about yourself." Catherine had no idea where to start. She was 28 years old, high school dropout, former foster kid who'd lived in her car, a woman who cleaned other people's houses for a living. Who was she to think she could become a teacher? Her finger hovered over the keyboard. Then she closed the laptop, put her head in her hands, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd agreed to. Downstairs, Anthony couldn't sleep either. He sat in the living room, Rebecca's journals spread across the coffee table in front of him. He'd been reading them for hours, learning his wife all over again through her words. She'd been scared too, scared of getting it wrong, scared of failing their sons, but she'd written it anyway, dreamed it anyway. Maybe we could help other families who feel as lost as we do right now. Anthony traced the words with his finger. "I'm sorry I didn't listen," he whispered into the empty room. "I'm sorry I waited so long." The house settled around him. Quiet, still, but not lonely. Not anymore. Upstairs, he heard footsteps. Catherine, moving around in her room. He wondered if she was as terrified as he was. The next morning, Catherine came down early to start breakfast. She found Anthony already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, the twins' lunchboxes lined up on the counter. He looked up when she walked in. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "No." She moved to the sink, started washing her hands out of habit, even though there was nothing to clean yet. "You?" Not really. They stood there in the pre-dawn quiet, two people who'd promised each other something impossible and were now facing the reality of it. "I don't know if I can do this," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Anthony set down his coffee cup. "What part?" "Any of it." She turned to face him. "College, teaching, running a center. I failed out of school 3 times, Anthony. What if I fail again?" "You won't. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He moved closer. "Because this time, you're not doing it alone. And this time, you actually want it." Catherine's eyes filled. "What if I'm not good enough?" "You already are." His voice was steady. "Sure, my sons are proof of that." She looked down, trying to blink back tears. Anthony hesitated, then reached out and gently lifted her chin, so she had to meet his eyes. "Catherine, you spent your whole life being told you weren't enough, but you are. You always have been, and I need you to start believing that." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm scared." "So am I." He dropped his hand. "I'm terrified I'll mess this up, that I'll fail Rebecca's dream, that I'll let my sons down again." "You won't." "Then we won't." He smiled slightly. "We'll just have to be scared together." Footsteps sounded on the stairs. The twins appeared in the doorway, hair messy, still in their pajamas. "Why are you both up so early?" Michael asked, rubbing his eyes. Catherine quickly wiped her face. "Just making breakfast." Victor studied them both with the kind of knowing look that 8-year-olds sometimes have. "Were you crying?" Catherine started to deny it, but Anthony spoke first. "We were talking about big changes. Sometimes, big changes are scary." Michael walked over to Catherine, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Is it good scary or bad scary?" Catherine's throat tightened. She knelt down so she was eye level with him. "Good scary," she said softly. "The kind that means something beautiful might happen if we're brave enough." Victor came closer. "Are you going somewhere?" "No, sweetheart. I'm staying. But I'm going to go to school, to learn how to be a real teacher." "You're already a real teacher," Victor said matter-of-factly. Michael nodded. "The best one we ever had." Catherine pulled them both into a hug, her eyes closing against fresh tears. Over their heads, she met Anthony's gaze. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite name. Grief and gratitude mixed together, love for his sons, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "Pancakes?" he asked quietly. Catherine smiled through her tears. Pancakes. That afternoon, Catherine opened the laptop again. This time, she started typing. My name is Catherine Walsh. I learned to read at 23 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was broken, that my brain didn't work the way it was supposed to, that I would never be more than I was. Then I met two boys who were breaking the same way I once did, and I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was just learning in a language no one had taught me yet. I want to become a teacher so I can be for other children what no one was for me, someone who sees them, really sees them, not as problems to fix, but as people who just need someone to believe in them first. She paused, read it over, then hit submit before fear could stop her. The application went through. Catherine closed the laptop slowly, put her hand over her heart and felt it beating hard and fast, and whispered a prayer she hadn't prayed in years. God, if this is real, if this is what you want from me, please don't let me fall. The house was quiet around her, but somewhere deep inside, where faith lives even when you've forgotten it's there, she felt something settle, not certainty, but peace. And for now, that was enough. 4 months passed like breathing. Catherine enrolled in community college, night classes, online courses, weekends buried in textbooks while the twins did their homework beside her at the kitchen table. Some nights she wanted to quit, stared at essays she'd rewritten 5 times and still didn't think were good enough, called herself foolish for thinking she could do this at 28 when she'd failed so completely at 18. But then Michael would look up from his reading and say, "You spelled that wrong," pointing at her paper with a grin, and she'd laugh. Fix it. Keep going. The twins transferred to a small progressive school across town. Smaller classes. Teachers trained in learning differences. Accommodations written into their education plans. Extra time, colored overlays, oral testing options. Within 6 weeks, both boys passed their first full exam. Catherine was there when Anthony got the email from their teacher. Watched his face go still, then crumble, then light up all at once. He showed her the screen with shaking hands. Michael, 87%. Victor, 92%. They did it, he whispered. They actually did it. Catherine's eyes filled. They always could. They just needed someone to let them. That night, Anthony took them all out to dinner. A real celebration. The twins ordered dessert first, laughing when the waiter pretended to be shocked. Catherine sat across from Anthony, watching him with his sons really present with them for the first time since she'd met him, laughing at their jokes, listening to their stories about school, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not finished, but real. By winter, the plans for the learning center were underway. Anthony had purchased an old Victorian house on the edge of town, 3 stories, wraparound porch, big windows that let in light from every direction. It needed work, but the bones were good. He brought Catherine to see it on a Saturday morning. They stood in the empty front room, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, their breath visible in the cold air. "What do you think?" Anthony asked. Catherine turned slowly, taking it in. The high ceilings, the hardwood floors that creaked under her feet, the built-in shelves that could hold books. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Each room will be different," Anthony said, his voice filling with something she'd never heard from him before: excitement. Sensory spaces, movement zones, quiet areas for kids who need stillness. Everything designed around how different brains actually learn. He pulled out architectural sketches, showed her the plans. Catherine looked at the drawings, her heart swelling in her chest. "When can we open?" "A year, maybe less if construction goes smoothly." He looked at her. "Will you be ready?" Catherine thought about her college classes, the teaching credential she was working toward, the fear that still woke her up some nights. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'll try. That's all anyone can do." They walked through the empty house together, mapping out rooms in their minds. The twins ran ahead, their voices echoing through the hollow spaces, calling out which room they wanted to help decorate. In what would become the main learning area, Catherine stopped, placed her hand on the window frame. "Rebecca would love this," she said quietly. Anthony came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "She does," he said. "I think she's been watching this whole time, making sure we got it right." Catherine looked at him, saw the peace in his face that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "You miss her?" "Every day." His voice was steady. "But I'm not drowning in it anymore. And I think, He paused. I think she'd be okay with that. They stood in the winter light, surrounded by the skeleton of a dream that was slowly becoming real. What should we call it? Catherine asked. Anthony smiled, pulled a small notebook from his pocket, one of Rebecca's journals, opened to a page near the end. Hope House. Catherine's breath caught. She already named it, Anthony said softly. Years ago. We're just catching up. That evening, back at the house, Catherine found a letter in her mailbox. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Miss Walsh, congratulations. You have been accepted into the Special Education Credential Program beginning next fall. She read it 3 times, then walked inside, found Anthony in his office, and handed him the letter without a word. He read it, looked up at her, smiled wider than she'd ever seen. You did it. We did it, she corrected. The twins appeared in the doorway, sensing something important. What happened? Victor asked. Catherine knelt down, pulled them both close. I'm going to be a real teacher, an official one. Michael's face lit up. Does that mean you can teach more kids like us? Yes, baby. That's exactly what it means. Victor looked at his father. Is the center really going to happen? Anthony nodded. It's really going to happen. And kids like us won't have to feel stupid anymore. Catherine's throat closed. No, sweetheart, they won't. Because we're going to show them what I showed you, that different doesn't mean broken. Michael threw his arms around her neck. You saved us, he whispered. Catherine held him tight, tears streaming down her face. No, baby, you saved me. 2 years later, the morning of the grand opening, Catherine stood in the center of what used to be an empty Victorian house and was now Hope House Learning Center. Everything was ready. Sensory rooms painted in soft colors, movement spaces with balance beams and yoga mats, quiet corners with beanbags and weighted blankets, shelves lined with books in every format, audiobooks, large print, graphic novels, colored overlays organized by shade, textured letters, art supplies, every tool a different kind of learner might need. And in the main entrance, a portrait of Rebecca Smith, her smile warm, her eyes kind. Beneath it, a plaque for every child who was told they couldn't, and for every person who helped them see they could. Catherine traced the words with her finger. She'd be so proud of you, a voice said behind her. She turned. Anthony stood in the doorway, wearing a suit but looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The twins flanked him on either side, 10 years old now, taller, confident, holding a ribbon for the ceremony. I hope so, Catherine said softly. I know so. Anthony walked closer. You turned her dream into something real. We did, Catherine corrected. All of us. Michael looked up at his mother's portrait. I wish she could see this. She can, Victor said quietly. I think she's been watching the whole time. By 9 o'clock, families started arriving. 47 children enrolled for the first semester. Each one carrying a story like the twins had carried years of being told they weren't trying hard enough, weren't smart enough, weren't enough. Catherine greeted them at the door, not as a housekeeper anymore. As Director Catherine Walsh, certified special education teacher, the woman who'd built this place from nothing but pain and hope. One mother approached her, holding the hand of a small girl, maybe 7 years old, with red eyes and hunched shoulders. This is Emma, the mother said, her voice breaking. She told me last week she doesn't want to be alive anymore because she's too stupid for school. Catherine's heart cracked open. She knelt in front of Emma, waiting until the girl looked at her. Hi, Emma. My name is Catherine, and I want to tell you something really important. She kept her voice gentle, steady. I didn't learn to read until I was 23 years old. Do you know how old that is? Emma shook her head. Really, really old, Catherine said with a small smile. Everyone told me I'd never be able to do it, that I wasn't smart enough, but they were wrong. My brain just needed different tools, and I think your brain might be the same. Emma's lip trembled. Really? Really? Catherine reached into her pocket, pulled out a green overlay. Want to try something? Emma nodded, barely. Catherine led her to a reading corner, opened a book, placed the overlay on the page. Try now. Emma looked down. Her eyes widened. The letters, they're not jumping as much. That's your brain finding its language, Catherine said softly. Emma read the first sentence, stumbled once, kept going. By the third sentence, she was reading clearly. When she finished the paragraph, she looked up at Catherine with tears streaming down her face. I did it. You did, Catherine whispered. And you're going to do it again and again until you stop being surprised by how brilliant you are. Emma threw her arms around Catherine's neck. Behind them, the mother covered her mouth, sobbing. Anthony watched from across the room, his own eyes wet. The ribbon-cutting ceremony happened at noon. Catherine stood beside Anthony on the front porch, the twins between them, holding giant scissors. Reporters had come, local news cameras, parents and children filling the yard. Anthony spoke first. My wife Rebecca believed every child deserves to be seen for who they are, not who they can't be. She knew our sons needed something different. And if she were here, she'd tell you that this center exists because one woman saw what everyone else missed, that different doesn't mean less. He turned to Catherine, his voice thick with emotion. Catherine, you didn't just save my sons. You honored my wife's dream in ways I never could have alone. Thank you. Catherine's throat tightened. She looked out at the crowd, at all the families who'd come, at Emma standing with her mother, at the twins smiling up at her. I spent most of my life believing I was broken, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. That God had made some kind of mistake when he made me. But standing here today, I know the truth. I wasn't broken. I was just being prepared. For this. For them. She gestured to the children. Every child here deserves to know they're not failing. They're not lazy. They're not stupid. They're just learning in a different language. And we're going to teach them that language. We're going to show them they're not alone. Michael and Victor cut the ribbon together. It fell in 2 pieces, and Hope House opened its doors. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Catherine walked through the quiet building one last time. She stopped in front of Rebecca's portrait. Thank you, she whispered, for dreaming this, for believing in your boys when no one else did, for somehow making sure I ended up exactly where I needed to be. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Anthony, she brought you to us, he said quietly. I'm sure of it. Catherine turned to face him. Do you really believe that? I do. His eyes held hers. Some people come into your life exactly when you need them. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later. Just right on time. They stood close in the dimming light. 2 people who'd been broken in different ways and had somehow found healing in helping others. Thank you, Catherine said, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you, Anthony replied, for teaching me how to see my own children. Outside, the sun was setting. Golden light poured through the windows, filling every corner of Hope House with warmth. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, in the space where grief becomes grace, Catherine felt it. That whisper she'd heard 2 years ago in a kitchen, holding 2 broken boys. This is why you're here. She closed her eyes. And finally, after 28 years of feeling invisible, Catherine Walsh let herself believe what she'd spent her whole life trying to find. She was seen. She always had been. And now, she'd spend the rest of her life making sure every child who walked through these doors knew they were seen too. Not despite being different, but because being different was exactly what made them beautiful. He had given up. After doctors, treatments, therapists, after years of waiting for something to change, nothing ever did. His twin boys were blind. That's what the world told him. That's what he believed. The house was always quiet. Until that afternoon, when he heard something that didn't belong there. Laughter. At first, he thought it was the wind, or maybe the TV left on in another room. But the sound came again, soft, sweet, strange. He stood up, heart pounding, unsure why he suddenly felt nervous. He walked down the hallway, slowly, listening, searching. And then he saw it, the light under the door. The playroom, the one no one used, the one that had been silent for years. The door was open, just a crack, and through it, he thought he saw her, the maid, kneeling by the tub, with his boys, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Joy Thompson didn't ask for much. She came to the Walker estate looking for steady work. She wasn't expecting warmth. She wasn't looking for connection. The house was large, cold, too clean like it had been frozen in time, curtains always drawn, lights dimmed low, rooms that echoed when no one spoke. Charles Walker barely looked at her the day she arrived. His voice was polite, distant. His eyes? Tired in a way that didn't come from work, but from loss. His sons, Gabriel and Michael, were just over 2. Beautiful, silent, unmoving. The file said they were blind from birth. No treatment had worked. No progress had ever come. Joy was told not to expect anything. Not reactions, not play, not light. But something about those boys stirred something in her. She couldn't name it, but she felt it. And one morning, while washing their faces, she saw something no one else had ever seen. Sometimes, what breaks you becomes the doorway to what heals you. This isn't just a story about sight. It's a story about grief, about silence, and about how love, real love, sees what others overlook. If you've ever felt like hope passed your house by, or if you've ever been the one who noticed something no one else did, then this story is for you. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and who in your life truly saw you when no one else did? Because sometimes, the miracle doesn't come through a doctor or a cure. Sometimes, it walks into the room quietly, wipes a child's face, and pays attention. The first morning, the house felt colder than the air outside. Joy Thompson stood at the edge of the long hallway, holding her breath without meaning to. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that feels like it's been there too long. Like grief had unpacked its bags and made itself at home. The floors didn't creak. The walls didn't speak. Even the light, what little there was, felt like it didn't have permission to move. She hadn't seen Mr. Walker since he greeted her briefly the night before. No handshake, just a nod, a few clipped instructions, and then he was gone. He hadn't stepped into the nursery, hadn't looked at the boys. She understood, in her own way. Some pain makes you disappear, even when you're still standing in the room. The boys were already awake when she entered, sitting in matching cribs, dressed in soft grey clothes, their eyes fixed on nothing. Gabriel and Michael, 2 years and 4 months old, pale skin, dark lashes, small hands resting quietly in their laps. They didn't cry, didn't reach, didn't react. She whispered their names anyway. No answer. The only sound in the room was the quiet rustle of the curtains behind her, heavy, lined, always drawn. She began the day's routine, just as the schedule listed. Breakfast, sponge bath, change of clothes, tidy the space. She moved slowly, giving them time to adjust to her presence. Not that they seemed to notice. Later, with the water warm in the tub and soft towels laid out, she lifted Michael first. His body was light, too light. She held him carefully, one hand supporting his back, the other gently cupping his head. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. He just sat there in the shallow water, quiet as ever. Joy rolled her sleeves up, dipped the washcloth in the water, and began to clean his face. And then it happened. A bead of soap slid toward his eye, and for the briefest moment, maybe a second, maybe less, his eyelid fluttered. She paused. It could have been reflex, a twitch, nothing. But something in her gut told her not to move. She stayed there, one hand in the water, her breath caught somewhere between fear and wonder. Then, slowly, she looked over at Gabriel. He was staring off, as always, but just behind him, the bathroom mirror caught a sliver of light. The sun had moved, just slightly, and now a soft line of brightness spilled across the tile. She adjusted the faucet without thinking, angling the chrome just enough for the reflection to shift. The light skimmed across the floor, across the edge of the tub, and stopped near Gabriel's toes. He turned his head. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, but it was deliberate. Just a few inches enough to follow the light. Joy blinked, heart thudding, her hands stilled in the water. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. She just watched. And then Michael did it again, that flutter. A soft blink, a blink that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with light. Her chest tightened. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. She finished the bath quietly, her movements gentle, steady, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. When she lifted the boys out and wrapped them in towels, she kissed their heads without thinking. They didn't respond. But she felt something shift in the room. Later, after they were dressed and settled, Joy walked into the hallway and looked out the nearest window. The sky was pale blue, the garden outside was still. And inside this house, something had just woken up. She didn't tell anyone what she saw. Not yet. She didn't trust herself to name it. But that night, when she was alone in the small room they'd given her, she opened a notebook she hadn't used in months. She wrote just 4 words. Michael blinked at light. Then she set the pen down, closed the book, and whispered a prayer into the quiet. God, if I'm wrong, stop me. But if I'm right, help me see what you see. There was a quiet rhythm to the days in the Walker house. It wasn't peace, not really. It was more like the stillness that follows loss. A house that learned to survive by not expecting anything new. Joy never asked questions. She moved through the rooms with soft steps and steady hands, learning the routines, reading between the silences. The twins stayed quiet too. No tantrums, no giggles. Just 2 small boys sitting in a sunless nursery, surrounded by toys that never moved. But once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. That blink, the shift of the eyes, the turn of the head, it stayed with her. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. She found herself watching them more closely now. Not out of suspicion, but out of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more happening beneath the stillness. One morning, as she changed their clothes, she swapped the boys' positions by the window. It was subtle. Gabriel, now closer to the light, squinted slightly as the curtains stirred. Michael reached out, not blindly, but towards something. She didn't write it down this time. She just watched and wondered. By the 3rd week, small details began to surface. She'd hum sometimes while folding laundry. Nothing special, just little things her grandmother used to sing in the kitchen. Old church melodies, pieces of memory. One afternoon, she was softly humming, "What a friend we have in Jesus," while tucking in the bedsheets, and she caught it. Gabriel turned his head toward her voice. Not the sound of the sheet, not the movement. Her voice. She paused, waited, then sang a little louder, just one line. Michael shifted. His fingers tapped the mattress beside him, almost like he was listening. No one else noticed. The housekeeper came and went. The gardener trimmed the hedge outside the nursery window. Charles Walker remained out of sight, his door always closed. But the boys were listening and responding. Bit by bit, Joy began to rearrange things. A lamp in the corner, a softer bulb. Curtains opened just a little, just enough for light to stretch across the floor in the late afternoon. She said nothing, but she watched, and the boys began to follow. Not every time, not always clearly, but enough. Enough to make her heart ache with questions. One evening, after the boys had been put to bed, Joy passed through the hallway and stopped by the linen closet. Something had been bothering her. The eye drops. They were part of the boys' care routine, prescribed, logged, administered at the same time every day. She'd been told they were for comfort, something to help with inflammation, keep the eyes from straining. But the more she watched, the more she noticed how still the boys became after the drops, almost like they withdrew, even more than usual. She reached for the cabinet key the housekeeper always left hanging near the pantry. Hands steady, breath quiet, she opened the locked drawer where their supplies were kept. Rows of small bottles, labels she didn't recognize. She scanned the ingredients, the instructions, and there it was, in tiny print right beneath the dosage. May reduce photosensitivity temporarily, not for long-term pediatric use. She stared at the words, read them again, then closed the cabinet carefully, her thoughts racing. Why would a child, a blind child, need something that reduced their sensitivity to light? That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling of the small guest room, her grandmother's voice echoing somewhere in her mind. You don't need a degree to pay attention. You just need to care enough to look twice. Joy didn't know what to do yet, but she knew this. Something wasn't right, and the boys, they were trying to speak in the only way they could, with blinks, with shifts, with silence that wasn't empty but full of something waiting to be seen. There were windows in every room, but none of them opened. They were framed in expensive wood, trimmed in thick velvet drapes, and always shut. Even on the sunniest days, the house stayed dim, cool, controlled. Joy noticed it more now. The way the morning light would try to peek through the edges of the curtains in the hallway and get swallowed by shadow. The way every lamp glowed just enough to see but never enough to feel warm. At first, she thought it was habit, then preference. But now, she wondered, what kind of home needs to keep light out? She started small. One afternoon, when the housekeeper was busy sorting invoices in the office, Joy slipped into the nursery and quietly pulled the curtain back 2 inches. The window was high, old, and a bit stiff, but the light poured in like it had been waiting years for permission. It stretched across the rug, a long golden stripe that touched the edge of the toy chest and spilled beneath Michael's crib. She said nothing. She just stepped back and watched. Michael blinked first, slowly. Then he turned his head, not sharply, but intentionally, as if something had brushed his awareness and he was reaching for it in the only way he knew how. Gabriel, who had been lying flat on his back, stirred. His eyes followed the light across the ceiling. Joy held her breath. Her heart thudded quietly in her chest. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't coincidence. This was response. And for the first time since she'd stepped into that house, she felt the weight of something heavy shift inside the room. Like a held breath, beginning to exhale. That night, she skipped the eye drops. Just for one boy. Just once. She waited until the house was quiet, the hallway still, the staff tucked into their corners. Then she stood at the nursery door, dropper in hand, and chose Gabriel. She gave Michael his dose as usual. But Gabriel, she simply held, whispering softly as she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, pretending to follow the routine. Then she tucked him in. The next morning, the difference was subtle, but there. Michael was still, passive, his eyes dull. But Gabriel? He reached. Toward the mirror Joy had set near the window. It caught a shard of light from the hallway, and he reached. Joy bit her lip, hard. She couldn't say anything yet. Not to the staff. Not to Charles. But something had shifted. Later that week, she stood in the nursery, watching dust float through the beam of sunlight she'd allowed in. She glanced around, then walked to the cabinet again. This time, she opened the drawer slowly. Her hands didn't shake. Inside, the same rows of bottles. Different brands, different labels. But the same warning etched at the bottom of each one. May reduce photosensitivity. Not recommended for long-term pediatric use without supervision. And then tucked in the back she found a folder. Old prescriptions, shipping invoices, signatures, initials. The name printed at the bottom of every form? Dr. Ernest Vale. She didn't know the name, but something in her chest tightened when she saw it. All of it had been approved. Signed, ordered, repeated. For months. That evening, the quiet in the house felt different. Not peaceful, not routine. Heavy. She walked past Mr. Walker's study. His door was cracked slightly, not open, but not closed either. Inside, she could see him sitting by the fireplace. Same posture, same stillness. A man who had learned to make peace with silence, because it required nothing from him. Joy paused. She thought about saying something. About the light, the blink, the drops. But then she remembered the first day, how he hadn't even looked into the nursery, how the grief in his eyes wasn't sharp anymore, just settled. Like a man who had made an agreement with heartbreak and stopped asking for more. So she kept walking, not because she was afraid, but because the truth wasn't ready yet. Not for him. Not for them. Not until it spoke louder than the silence. That night, she opened her notebook again. She wrote slowly, carefully. 1 entry at a time. Opened curtain 2 inches. Light reached crib. Gabriel tracked mirror. No eye drops. Increased response. Found name, Dr. Ernest Vale. Then, at the bottom, in quiet handwriting, they are responding to light. I don't think they're blind. I think someone made them this way. The mirror was small. Just a piece from Joy's old compact, the kind she used to keep in her purse back when life was simpler. She'd cleaned it, dried it, and set it gently on the nursery shelf near the window, where the late afternoon light passed through like a blessing. She didn't tell anyone. Some truths don't come in speeches. They arrive in quiet gestures, like a hand placing a mirror on the floor to see what happens next. It was nearly 5 p.m. The house was still. Dinner was being prepped in the kitchen, the soft clatter of utensils echoing faintly through the vents. The housekeeper had left early that day, and no one else ever came into the nursery this time of day. Just Joy. And the boys. She sat between their cribs, knees folded, the mirror angled just so. A sliver of light caught it, bouncing across the wall, then the floor, then the tiny giraffe toy between them. Gabriel's eyes caught the shimmer first. He blinked once, then again, then turned his face toward it, with a slow, searching motion. Michael followed, his fingers twitching near the rails of his crib. The light danced gently across the bars. His head moved with it. Joy felt her throat tighten, but she stayed still, no sound, no sudden breath. Her hand, steady. Her heart, loud. This was no accident. They were watching. They were seeing. They were reaching for the thing the world said didn't exist. And then, a creak in the hallway. Soft, careful. She didn't look. She didn't need to. Some footsteps carry a weight only grief can make. Even when silent, they say everything. She knew it was him. Charles Walker stood at the threshold of the nursery. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't interrupt. The door was open just wide enough for him to see everything. Joy, sitting on the floor, the mirror in her hand. His sons, eyes lit with something he hadn't seen since the day they were born. Light, movement, life. She turned her head slightly, caught him in her periphery, but didn't panic. She just whispered, "We're playing." Her voice was soft. Too soft for defense, too strong for denial. Charles stepped in, slow, almost like he didn't trust the floor beneath him. His eyes flicked from Joy to the boys, to the shimmer on the wall, to the expression on Gabriel's face. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask questions. He just stared. And in that long, aching moment, something happened in his face, not dramatic, not loud. A breaking. A soft kind. The kind men try to swallow when no one's watching. "What is this?" he asked, finally. His voice wasn't angry, just cracked, worn down to the bone. Joy looked up. Her hands didn't move. "They see the light," she said quietly. "They're following it." He blinked. Once. Twice. Then shook his head, almost like trying to wake himself from a dream. "That's not." He stopped. Started again. "That's not possible." But his eyes didn't leave the boys. Michael reached again, his hand brushing the edge of light on the floor. Gabriel tilted his head, tracking the flicker on the ceiling. "They've never," he whispered. "Not once, not in 2 years." Joy nodded gently. "I know, that's what I thought too." The room went quiet again. Not the empty kind, the heavy kind. The kind of silence that follows truth when it finally walks in. Charles looked at Joy, then really looked. Not as a maid, not as someone passing through, but as a witness, a person who had stayed long enough to notice what no one else did, a person who wasn't afraid to look again. He didn't speak after that. He just turned, slowly, and walked out. The door stayed open behind him, and for the first time since Joy arrived, the light from the hallway was allowed to stay. That night, she didn't write in her notebook. She sat on the edge of her bed, the mirror resting in her hands, and just stared at it. There were still no answers, no guarantees, no proof anyone would believe. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. Charles didn't speak of it the next morning. Not to Joy, not to the boys, not to anyone. He didn't even glance at the mirror on the nursery shelf. Didn't ask where it came from. Didn't ask why his sons had followed the light. But something had changed in him. Joy could see it. He lingered in the hallway longer than usual, paused outside the nursery door before heading into his office. Watched, quietly, when she bathed the boys as if afraid to see too much or not enough. He didn't want to believe, but he didn't want to look away either. That afternoon, Joy did something bold. She walked into the study holding a notebook. Not a report, not a complaint. Just pages filled with days of observations, scribbled in careful handwriting, like pieces of a puzzle only she had tried to fit together. Charles looked up from his desk. His expression wasn't cold, just guarded, like a man who spent years building walls for good reason and isn't sure yet whether to tear one down. Joy stood still in front of him, not demanding, not pushing, just offering. "I'd like to show you something," she said softly. "You don't have to agree, just look." She opened the notebook. Page by page, she showed him. The time she opened the curtain and Michael blinked. The day Gabriel tracked the sunlight across the ceiling. The evening she skipped the drops and saw more movement than ever before. The label warnings, the dosage logs, the name Dr. Ernest Vale. Charles didn't interrupt. He sat there in silence, the kind that listens. One hand at his mouth, the other resting flat on the table, fingers curled slightly, like holding something invisible. He turned a page, read, then another. At one point, his eyes paused on a note Joy had barely remembered writing. "Light doesn't lie. It just waits for someone to see it." He closed the notebook slowly, then looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something unguarded in his face. "I never wanted to believe it," he said. His voice was low, quiet but not lost. "When they told me, after Caroline died, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I was afraid to hope." Joy didn't answer. She didn't have to. She knew what it cost to hope when it had let you down before. Charles looked toward the hallway, toward the nursery he had barely entered in months. "They told me not to expect progress, that blind children don't always respond, that silence was normal, that this was our life now." He looked back at her, and I believed them, because it was easier than believing something might still be possible. There was a pause. The room felt smaller now, not cramped, but close, as if everything inside it had leaned in. "Do you think it's the drops?" he asked. Joy nodded. "I think it's part of it, and I think someone knew. I don't know why yet, but the patterns don't lie." Charles stood, slowly. He looked like a man holding something fragile, something he hadn't touched in years. "Let's stop them, just for a couple days." Joy met his gaze. "Are you sure?" "No," he said, "but I can't ignore it anymore." For the next 48 hours, they stopped the drops. Together, Joy tracked everything, every blink, every turn of the head, every flicker of recognition. Charles began joining her quietly in the nursery. Not with questions, not with control, just presence. He sat on the floor once, knees stiff, unsure how to move, how to play. But the boys didn't seem to mind. When Michael reached toward the soft beam of light falling across the rug, Charles whispered, "He sees it." Joy smiled gently. "Yes," she said, "he does." Gabriel squinted at the mirror, then laughed not loudly, but enough to echo. Charles put a hand to his chest, as if something inside had startled awake. That evening, he asked Joy something simple. "Do you believe this was always there, and we just missed it?" She looked at the boys, now curled in their blankets, breathing slow. "I think it was waiting," she said, "for someone to look again." It was Joy's idea. She found the letter decals in a drawer of old toys stuck beneath a broken puzzle box, half yellowed with time. They were meant for windows. Colorful letters, soft adhesive, a child's name, spelled out in light. She held them in her hands for a long time before doing anything. Then one morning, just after breakfast, she walked into the nursery and opened the curtains all the way. For the first time, sunlight flooded the room. Not just a crack or a corner, but full. It hit the cribs, the floor, the books, the mirror on the shelf, and something else too. The dust. Years of it, floating upward like spirits unbottled. Joy stood by the window and pressed the letters softly, one by one, onto the glass. G. A. B. R, I, E, L, then the next, M, I, C, H, A, E, L. The boys didn't speak, but they watched the light move across their names, watched her hands trace the shapes, watched like they knew on some wordless level that something sacred was happening. And for a moment, it felt like the house was holding its breath. Charles didn't come until later. The nursery was quieter now, sunlight soft and golden, warming the carpet like grace itself had entered through the window. Joy was sitting with the boys, Gabriel curled beside her, Michael on her lap. They were playing with nothing, just the light on the floor, the mirror catching it, bouncing it gently across the rug. Charles stepped in. But this time, he didn't stop at the doorway. He knelt down beside them, slower than usual, his joints stiff, his hands unsure. But he came close, closer than he ever had. Joy glanced up, offering a small smile. He didn't return it. His eyes were locked on the glass, on the names. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. Caroline picked those names. His voice was low, not choked, not shaky, just buried, like someone digging something up they weren't sure they wanted to find. Joy said nothing. She loved angels, he continued, not in a cheesy way, just, she said she wanted names that meant something. He stared at the letters on the window, the way the sunlight cut through them. She died before she ever got to say them out loud. There it was. Not just pain, not just memory, but the breaking. Not with sound, but with stillness. He leaned back against the wall, one hand over his mouth, eyes shining but not falling. Joy didn't speak. She just let it hang. Sometimes silence is the only kind of respect. A few minutes passed. Then Gabriel did something he hadn't done before. He reached up toward the window. His fingers brushed the glass, landed on the G. He held it there. Charles watched, breath tight, lips parted, like a man not ready to breathe again just yet. Then Michael, not to be left behind, scooted forward, a quiet grunt in his throat, and touched the M. They didn't know what the letters meant, but their fingers traced them, like memory. Charles blinked, then whispered, "They've never done that before." Joy finally spoke gently. "They're learning their names." He nodded once, but it broke something anyway. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and for the first time since she met him, Charles looked small. Not weak, not pitiful, just human. Just a man whose life had been too quiet for too long. Later, Joy found him sitting in the sunroom, a room no one used. The curtains had always stayed closed in there. The plants had died long ago. But now, the windows were open, and he was sitting in the light. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then stepped in, carefully. "I'm sorry," he said without looking at her. Joy paused. For what? For letting go too early, for choosing silence over searching. He turned toward her. "You didn't just see my sons, you saw what I couldn't." She didn't respond with words. She just sat down beside him, knees almost touching. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was healing. And outside, the wind lifted the curtain, just enough to let the sun fall softly on the floor. Charles didn't return to his office the next morning. He sat in the sunroom, just like the night before. The curtains open now, the light stretching across the cold tile like it had been waiting for years. A mug of coffee rested on the table beside him, still full, untouched. He wasn't reading, wasn't making calls, just sitting, still, watching dust float in the sunlight like tiny reminders of time he couldn't get back. Joy passed by once, then again, and finally stepped inside. He didn't look at her, but she could tell he knew she was there. His voice was quiet when it came. "You said someone knew." She paused. "Yes." "About the drops?" "Yes." He nodded, slowly, as if confirming a suspicion that had already formed. "I let them into this house. I paid them. I handed over my sons." Joy sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. You were grieving. I was hiding. Silence settled between them again, not hostile, just hard. He turned toward her, not angry, just exhausted. Do you know what it's like to believe the worst because it's easier than hoping? Joy met his gaze. I think hope scares people more than pain does. He let out a short breath. Not a laugh, not a cry, just the sound of someone standing on the edge of regret. That afternoon, Charles called his lawyer, asked for the medical release forms, reviewed every note signed, every approval, every prescription. Then he called someone else, a name Joy hadn't heard before, Dr. Ernest Vale. The man on the other end of the call answered with practiced ease, calm, clinical. Mr. Walker, everything all right? Charles didn't speak right away. I want a full breakdown of the boy's prescriptions, every drug, every change, every reason. Of course, but may I ask what prompted? Just send it, by tonight. His tone wasn't cold, it was awake now. And Ernest Vale, whoever he really was, knew it. Later, Joy found Charles in the nursery. He was standing by the cribs, watching his sons sleep. No clipboard, no phone, just watching. Michael had one hand resting against the letter M on the window. Gabriel was curled beneath the sunlight, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. They don't need perfect, Joy said softly behind him. They just need present. He nodded, slowly. I don't know how to fix this. Start with not turning away. He stayed there for a long time. The next morning, Joy made a decision. She contacted someone she hadn't spoken to in years. A friend of her grandmother's, a retired nurse who'd once worked in pharmaceutical compliance. She told her just enough to raise concern, and the woman gave her a name. A young lab technician who had recently resigned from a private clinic involved in experimental pediatric trials. I'll reach out, Joy said. Quietly, the investigation began in silence. Charles hired a private investigator, discreet, professional. Joy started keeping more detailed notes, photos, patterns, times, dosage, changes, reactions. The twins continued to grow brighter, not suddenly, not miraculously, but steadily. They reached more, turned more, responded more. And every time they did, the weight in Charles's chest pressed harder, because every blink was a question. How long has this been possible? What did I miss? What did I allow? One night, just after the twins had gone to sleep, Joy found Charles at the kitchen table. He had the folder open in front of him, the one from Dr. Vale. Pages of prescriptions, notes, authorizations, all signed, all legal, all clean. Too clean. Nothing here explains anything, he said, flipping through. They covered it well. That's how shadows work, Joy said. They don't need chaos, just quiet. He looked up. I want to go public. Not yet, but soon. Joy nodded. We will, when the story's ready, when the truth is loud enough. And then, for the first time, he said their names. Out loud, clearly. Gabriel, Michael. The sound of them caught in his throat, not broken, just heavy with meaning. Joy smiled. They know you're saying it. Do you think they forgive me? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the window where their names still clung to the glass. Letters bent slightly from the sun, but still holding. I think they're waiting. For what? For you to see them, not like the world sees them, not like doctors did, but as your boys. Charles didn't speak, but this time he stayed in the room. The story didn't break with shouting. It started with a photo, Gabriel's hand resting on the letter G. Michael turning toward a beam of light, eyes open, focused, alive. Joy had taken it weeks earlier, not to prove anything, just to remember. But now, it became a seed, the kind you plant quietly, and pray it grows. Charles gave it to a reporter he trusted, a woman who once wrote about his late wife's foundation, someone who remembered Caroline not as a name in a headline, but as a human being. He didn't give her everything, not yet. Just enough. Enough to start the questions. The article came out on a Wednesday. Born blind or made blind. A billionaire's twins and the nurse who noticed. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't cruel. It was curious, the kind of truth that doesn't scream, but lingers. Within 24 hours, the phone started ringing. Lawyers, doctors, journalists, parents. The next day, another article. Then a radio segment. Then a televised interview request, not for Charles, for Joy. She declined. Not yet, she told him. Let the story speak first. The court date came faster than anyone expected. The lab denied everything. The doctor, Dr. Ernest Vale, claimed full legal authority. Every signature, every document, every dose had been approved. Joy testified first. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She just told the truth moment by moment, memory by memory. She spoke of blinking, light, laughter, the way silence can lie when no one questions it. She spoke of her grandmother's voice. You don't need a degree to pay attention. The courtroom didn't move when she finished. But it didn't need to. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to land. Charles took the stand next. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Just stood there, one hand on the edge of the podium, the other resting near his chest, like holding something invisible. I believed what they told me, he began. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't pay attention. And because of that, my sons were put through something I'll never fully understand. He looked down for a moment, then back up. But someone did pay attention. Not for money, not for recognition. Just because she cared. She saw what none of us saw. And because of her, I got to see my sons for the first time. He didn't speak long, but no one in that room looked away. When the whistleblower came forward, the young technician Joy had reached through her contact, the case cracked wide open. She brought evidence. Emails, formulas, trials not listed in public records, payments, protocols, internal messages about light suppression datasets. The truth didn't scream. It stacked page by page, fact by fact. And when the judge ruled, when the verdict came down, the room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Malpractice confirmed. Experimental drug trials without proper consent. Severe ethical breaches. The clinic was shut down. Dr. Vale lost his license. And the boys, Gabriel and Michael, became something more than a headline. They became seen. Back at the estate, the windows stayed open now. Light lived there again. Not loud, not blinding, but soft, honest, free. One morning, Joy brought in a set of clear window crayons, the kind you can use to write messages on glass. She handed one to Gabriel. You want to try? He looked at her eyes, focused, aware, and took it in his small hand. She steadied his grip, helped him make the first letter. J. Michael joined. Scribbled beside it. Joy couldn't tell what he meant to write, but she didn't correct him. It was perfect. Charles stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He just watched, and when Gabriel turned to him, eyes full of light, and smiled, Charles smiled back. They see you, Joy said gently. He nodded. And now I see them. The house was no longer quiet. Not like before. The kind of silence that once settled into the walls, heavy and constant, had been replaced with something new. Stillness that breathed. Laughter that echoed down the hall without apology. Voices not many, not loud but alive. The curtains stayed open now. Not just in the nursery. Everywhere. Windows that once held years of dust now framed sunlight. Light that moved across the floor like forgiveness. Light that had always wanted in, just waited for someone to let it. Joy was packing. Not quickly, not sadly, but with care. Her contract was up. No one had asked her to stay, and she hadn't expected to. Charles had thanked her more times than she could count, in quiet gestures, in changed routines, in the way he no longer walked past the nursery like it wasn't there. But still, this was never meant to be hers. She folded the last of her clothes into a small duffel and turned to look at the room that had held her for months. Simple, quiet, but full now. Full of memory, full of proof. Downstairs, Charles was waiting. He stood in the entryway, dressed simply, no suit, no tie, just a father, trying to find words for something that mattered. When she came down the stairs, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at her the way someone does when they finally see not just what you did, but who you are. Then he handed her something. A leather-bound book. Simple, unmarked. Inside, the first page already written. His handwriting small, steady. Walker Thompson Family Logbook. Entry 1. Gabriel smiled at his reflection. Michael touched the light. Joy laughed. Charles breathed. Joy blinked, slow. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the book. "It's yours," he said quietly. "Ours, if you'll stay." She didn't answer with words. She just nodded once and smiled. That evening, they sat together in the new sunroom, where the ivy had started to grow again along the windows. The boys were on the floor, chasing the glint of a silver wind chime that hung from the open window. Gabriel's fingers brushed it. Michael laughed, full and clear. Charles turned to Joy. "What do you call this?" She looked at the boys, the light, the air moving through the room like breath. "Attention," she said, "and grace." In the weeks that followed, Charles made it official. Not just the foundation, though, they did that too. The Second Glance Foundation. Built to advocate for children misdiagnosed, for mothers and caregivers ignored, for stories silenced by systems that never paid attention. But the family part, that's what mattered most. One morning, Joy placed new decals on the nursery window. Gabriel, Michael, and beneath them, just one more, Joy. The boys traced the letters with their fingers. Michael looked up, pointed to hers, and said it clearly, "Joy." She turned, startled, eyes glassed with disbelief. Charles stood in the doorway. "They see you," he said. "And now I do too." Years from now, people would ask how it happened, how blindness could be misdiagnosed, how so many experts could miss what one maid noticed in a mirror, and no one would have a perfect answer, because it wasn't just science, it wasn't just medicine, and it wasn't just one blink. It was love that paid attention. It was truth that refused to be quiet. It was God moving, not in thunder, but in the watching eyes of a child who followed light. Joy would never call it a miracle. She would sit with Gabriel and Michael on the floor and say softly, "You weren't waiting to be healed. You were waiting to be seen." The house glows now, not from wealth, not from restoration, but from windows that stay open, from names written in glass, and laughter that no one dares to silence anymore, from light finally having a home to live in.